All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, wherever you are, different parts of the world. I hope you're all keeping healthy and happy and safe. So we have another one of our IFEAST GEDC IUCE global webinars. Welcome you all to just another exciting, very topical, important webinar. And this is by Dr. Anupam Joshi, who is the Oros Family Professor and Chair of Computer Science and Electrical Engineering Department at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, the Director of the Center for Cybersecurity, Fellow of IEEE, obtained a BTech degree from IIT Delhi, a Master's and PhD from Purdue University. His research is in the area of network computing and intelligent systems, primarily focusing on data management, security, privacy in mobile, pervasive computing environments, and policy-driven approaches to security and privacy. He's also interested in semantic web and data text web analytics, especially in the application of cybersecurity and healthcare. He obviously published many papers and with many citations and many patents, etc. I'm not going to go into that, but thank you so much, Dr. Anupam Joshi. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Really appreciate this, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vedula, for the kind introduction, and to you and Hans for inviting me to give this talk to this global audience. And as Dr. Vedula said, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever your time zone may be. I'm speaking to you from my little home office. Please ignore the fan in the background because it turns out that we have snow outside, so the fan has no use right now. So I'm going to talk to you about a topic which has been the focus of my research for the last few years, and it's a topic around the intersection of AI and cybersecurity. And given the general nature of the audience, what I will do is I will talk a little bit about why I think this is important and needed, and then say a little bit about some work we have done. But the primary purpose of this talk is not to give you a deep dive into the technical work we have done, but rather sort of engage from the perspective of saying what this domain is and why it's going to be critical. So let me move on. So if you look at what is currently happening in cybersecurity, right? So you have a lot of point-based solutions. What that means is that someone, you will buy a firewall, you will buy antivirus, you will buy some kind of a theme system. You'll buy a bunch of these things, most of which are doing fairly simple analysis on the incoming data. Here's a snort rule that matches, this particular hex signature in a malware. And so a lot of this is really bad at handling attacks that are new. And because it is bad at handling attacks that are new, it's also bad at handling what are being called the advanced persistent threats, right? And their examples are legion, right? So the mean time, according to a study from IBM, and this number keeps getting updated, but the last study I read, which came out in 2021, the mean time to detect such an attack today is in the order of months, right? And it's interesting, it's often a third-party organization that comes in and says, hey, we noticed something weird is going on. Look, and then people find evidences of those attacks. Now, this is very different. The kind of attacks I'm talking about are not your ransomware attacks or denial of service attacks, which announce themselves. Their entire purpose is to say, I've done something bad, pay me money. Or I've done something bad, I've taken your website out for a political reason or some other activism kind of concern, So the current state of the art, basically what it says is we're going to have all these point-based solutions and we're going to dashboard them, and there will be an analyst looking at this bunch of screens that are giving a variety of information, and then you are fundamentally relying on the analyst being this sort of super girl, like this superhuman kind of a person that can look at all these disparate pieces of information and say, oh, here is an attack because I noticed this and that and a third thing, and all these little things, none of which themselves are attacks, but I noticed that they fit a pattern. Now, if you are a huge company, Fortune 10 or something, or a Fortune 100, or the government of a technologically advanced country, you probably have a small cadre of well-trained people who have that capability. But the attack vectors rarely directly go against those targets. They go against sort of the smaller targets and then do privilege escalations and lateral movements. So you all remember, hopefully, in the US audience at least, that there was this big attack against a supermarket chain Target several years ago. And then they eventually discovered that the attack happened not because Target systems were hacked, they were well protected, but because Target had given access to their systems to a small third-party engineering firm which fixed their heating and cooling, their HVAC system. And since those are controlled by computers, that outside organization would come in, plug their computer, to do repairs or change settings or whatever. And the adversary had actually subverted that small company, which was not as well defended, taken over their machines, and the next time those machines were connected, boom. Right? So that's the kind of thing where you are relying on this analyst being some kind of a super person, and that's what I think that's where long-term AI will be useful. I'll expand on this theme a little bit. So here's an example, right? These were two real attacks, Petya in 2016, NotPetya in 2017. And you notice that the second, third, and the fourth steps were same. Right? What changed was how are you entering into the system? And again, you and I, reasonably well-educated engineers, looking at this can say, yep, these are variants of an attack. If this thing on the left-hand side is known to be an attack, then clearly this thing on the right-hand side is also an attack. But as far as sort of the traditional state-of-the-art of defenses is concerned, they will say, oh, step one is different from step two. Therefore, even if I know that step one is an attack, this on the left is an attack, I can't assume that step one on the right is an attack because they are different. So let me continue the storytelling by giving you another example from an old attack. This is courtesy the Mitre Corporation, who have permitted me to share this slide. So this was a situation where, and I'll try to abstract this away, a large defense contractor in the United States, its aerospace division, 5 engineers working in that division all received emails from the professional society, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, AIAA, right? Suggesting that they had been selected for, and I forget what the actual award's name was, but like the Outstanding Scientist of the Year or something. And it said, you've been nominated for this award. Here is the form to accept the nomination. Please fill in your details, attach your CV, and send it back. Now it turns out that most engineers are smart people, even if I can say so myself, right? And these people said, we're all distinguished scientists and engineers, but the probability that all 5 of us working in the same division of the same large company have all been nominated to be Outstanding Scientists of the Year or Outstanding Engineers of the Year or whatever it was, right? the probability of that happening is low. So they went to the security people. The security people told them, okay, wait. They set up a honeypot. For those of you who are not familiar with a honeypot, it's a specialized machine which doesn't have any critical information, which security people, use to monitor bad things. So they had them open these PDF attachments in this honeypot, and then they tracked the adversaries' actions for 2 years, as you can see, between January 2010 and January 2012. And in this 2-year period, this adversary had 40 attacks, different attacks, right? And you can see each of them has a CVE number. CVE, for those of you who are not familiar, stands for Common Vulnerability Enumeration, which is a number given to an exploit by NIST in the US that describes the attack and what it does. Now, all these numbers are post facto. In other words, when the attack actually happened, it was a completely unknown 0-day attack. These numbers were given later. So over this 2-year period, right? So in 24 months, the adversary had 40 new attacks, which means basically they were throwing in about sort of 2 new attacks a month, because the adversary rightly believed that, once they used an exploit, eventually people will find out that something bad had been done and they would defend against that exploit. So they kept doing newer and newer things. Right? So notice the sophistication of the adversary. You're talking about an actor that can think of basically 2 new, completely unknown attacks a month against the system. And then the implants they put, the things they put to actually, mostly to exfiltrate information, those are classified to the best of my knowledge. Right? That the United States government still hasn't said what these were. So you can see, right, that the adversaries' sort of tools, technologies, and practices, TTPs, are fairly sophisticated, and they start with sort of this kill chain idea, where I don't want to get into a lot of detail. This actually comes from the United States Air Force, which is like, how do you attack? And then what do you do? So in the Air Force things, it's called T2E2, AF, etc. But here the idea is this: you attack by first doing reconnaissance, right? So you say, okay, this is an organization. Professor Anupam Joshi is the chair of computer science and electrical engineering. He reports to the dean of engineering. The dean of engineering reports to the provost. The provost reports to the president. Then you move around the UMBC website and you see, oh, the computer science and computer engineering are seeing record enrollments. So you do this kind of recon, right? And then you craft an email allegedly from, something that looks like the address of the dean of engineering or the office of admissions at UMBC to Professor Joshi that says, dear Professor Joshi, here are the latest record-breaking numbers from admissions for fall 22. Please open the attached PDF to see the graph and respond with how you plan to create new classes to handle this. So you notice that the adversary is not sending an email to Professor Joshi saying, Bill Gates is promising $5,000 to anyone who clicks this email, because they know that Professor Joshi will not click that email. But if an email comes from the dean of engineering or the provost that talks about a real issue that Professor Joshi is supposed to deal with, you could probably fool Professor Joshi, right? So that requires recon. So there's the skill chain, and what the ideal is that you want to stop the attack, to use the United States Air Force terminology, left of boom, before the bad thing has happened, right? And so the idea is you want to catch attacks basically before this little exploit thing you see here, right? Before the adversary is actually able to exploit. And this is where AI can help. So how can AI help? So if you look, and again, this is a global audience, I just put the game I like the best, cricket. But so the cricket aficionados, follow along. If you don't know what cricket is, think of football or soccer, depending on where you are. That's think of that game. Or if you're from one of the sort of far northern countries, think of ice hockey. But the basic idea is that in cricket, a good batsman doesn't turn his ball to the bowler and look at the wickets and sees the balls that are coming around and tries to swat them away as they move to the wicket, right? Similarly, in football, soccer, it is not the case that the goalkeeper looks at the goal line, sees if a ball is about to cross the goal line, and then tries to swat it away, right? That's not true. What you want to do, and again, think of AI because AI will help, is that you want to see the game as it evolves, right? You want to see the attack as it is forming before the attack actually happens. So in cricket, right, a good batsman says, okay, is the bowler coming over the wicket or around the wicket, right? Is the bowler's run up longer than normal or shorter than normal? Did they rub the ball on their forehead or did they rub them on their hands, right? Because that changes for those of you who are not familiar with cricket, that changes the aerodynamics of the ball, which then determines how much it moves in the air as it is being thrown towards the batsman. The batsman also looks at the field placement, right? Is there a third slip, right? How far back is the wicket keeper? So, similarly in football, a good goalie, as I said, is not turning his back to the field and looking at the goal. A good goalie is saying, okay, what just happened? Do I notice that the halfback has moved forward, right? That the midfielder is running down at high speed down the right side, right? Do I notice, that there is one of the flankers or the fronts is moving into a position just outside the penalty box, right? So I notice all this to understand how I'm likely to be attacked, so I am prepared ahead of time to defend against that attack. But if you think about cybersecurity, right, what are we doing? We're saying, okay, let's put a firewall. Let's look at all the traffic that's coming in and say, oh, this traffic looks bad. So you basically allowed the adversary to come all the way to your ingress point before you do something about it. So the question is, can you do better? And my claim is that you can, and this is where AI sort of helps. So the idea is that you're being given in modern systems a lot of knowledge from sensors, right? Whether those sensors are the kind that you think about normally for cybersecurity, such as network-based sensors, firewalls, host-based sensors, antivirus scanners, those kinds of things, or novel scanners. And I'll talk a little bit more about this piece, which is, so we, for example, are building systems where we go and look at what kind of attacks are being discussed in the dark web today, right? Is there a blog post about some new attack or some new vulnerability that has been discovered? Has NIST pushed out some information bulletin, or has Microsoft pushed out an information bulletin about a potential vulnerability? So, you're basically getting a lot of this knowledge. And the idea is, can you, much like you expect that super smart analysts to do, reason over these disparate pieces of information to say, if these things are happening based on what I know and what I heard about potential attacks and all, something bad is probably beginning to happen to my system. So to do that, you need to do foundational research in how do you represent this kind of knowledge. And for us, that has taken the form of something called the Unified Cybersecurity Ontology. I urge you to Google that. If for those of you who are in this area, The current version of ontologies is available, downloadable. You can free to use it in your research. And what we do is we sort of build on this current standard in practice, although our ontology in some sense predates it, but we try to keep up. So this is an XML-based architecture that is currently used to indicate threats and share threat information, called structured threat, information exchange format. This runs on something called, so these are nice acronyms that our friends at MITRE dreamed up with. So there's STIX, and STIX runs on top of Taxi, which are servers that share that threat information with you. And you can see the kind of things this models, and in turn, what we model. We model much more than this, of course, is so you can say that there is an attack. An attack is a part of an attack campaign. An attack campaign is attributed to a particular threat actor. That threat actor, typically uses certain kinds of, tools of the trade, if you would, TTPs. And, how you identify TTP is based on certain observations in your system. And then given a TTP, how do you mitigate it? So all of that can be captured and shared. So what are we doing? And how is AI helpful? AI is helpful in detecting potential new vulnerabilities, from all this textual information that is out there, right? Dark web descriptions, blogs, tweets, Reddit discussions, etc. So we map this to a knowledge graph. We create a knowledge graph that is expressed using the UCO ontology. And then, so think of this as the background knowledge. If you were a smart analyst, right, you would probably be reading all this. You would be spending your time saying, okay, what are people talking about in the community about potential new vulnerabilities, potential new attacks? I mean, in the dark web, people offer to sell you new attacks on things, right, for certain monetary consideration. So, you're reading all this saying, hey, someone's saying they have a new attack to sell against Microsoft Word, right, or the Linux window manager, right, ADM or something. So, okay, now if you're a smart analyst, you're reading all this and saying, okay, I'm observing the field of play. I'm seeing what attacks are possible. Let me begin to defensively adjust my system, right? As a goalkeeper, let me begin to move and place myself from where I think the attack is likely to come. As a batsman, let me adjust my stance to see what kind of delivery, to handle the kind of delivery I think is coming next, right? This is going to be an outswinger that is going to be pitched, on the middle stump and short pitched. So because I noticed that based on the field, so I will adjust my stance accordingly. So, you want to read these descriptions, and if you're a smart security analyst, you'll say, okay, let me think about where I'm running Word on my machine, or where I'm running KDM, and what kind of traffic is permitted, and I begin to adjust my defensive posture. Now, the second thing I want to know is, can I recognize the context of the system in potential attacks, right? So that when I begin to get actual data, so far I was observing, now, and I was adjusting my defensive stance. Now I noticed that the forward has actually kicked the ball, or in cricket, the bowler has actually, completed his bowling action or her bowling action and thrown the ball. Now I say, okay, I can begin to observe the ball in flight. And based on all this prior evidence, I had adjusted my defensive posture, but now I'm beginning to see the potential attack unfold and say, aha, indeed it is the case that this is going to be a short pitched ball, maybe not on my middle stump as I had originally thought, but somewhere between my off and middle, and the bowler is trying to get me to, play this kind of a shot, which will lead to a potential catch on the third slip that takes place, right? So I've now identified the actual attack. It's also possible that I will look at the ball and flight and say, oops, I was wrong. This is just going to be a straight bouncer. So this is the kind of reasoning that today we are expecting the security analyst to do. And the idea is there is so much data that is potentially observable that no good security single analyst can deal with it. And number two, not all security analysts are born equal, right? So you want to take the average security analyst and give them the tools from AI that will help them do this. So here is an example, right, of this concretized. Let's stop talking about cricket and football. Let's talk about cybersecurity. So here's the kind of background knowledge, right? New vulnerabilities have been discovered in some particular software. Okay, this is the intelligence I may be getting. Here is some background knowledge, right? Household machines which have DHCP addresses are often compromised and used as zombies. So this is the kind of thing that an analyst either reads or knows. Then there is the observed state of the system, right? The analyst may know what software is installed, what processes are running, how much network traffic am I seeing, what kind of memory is a given process consuming, how many, you can go down the weeds, right? How many segmentation, how many page faults has a given process caused? Is that similar to what it normally does? What file system areas is a given process touching? Those are the areas that it normally touches, and so on and so forth. And then another element that you don't normally think about, but was used very successfully in an attack. And this is a global audience, so I won't name countries. In this particular case, the organization had a policy that all travel was arranged through the central travel office, and the outside travel agencies communicated with the central travel office. And so you were not, as an individual, you were never supposed to get an email with travel details from the outside agency. That should go to the travel office. The travel office will send it to you. And one of the attacks was caught because they noticed that, oh, why is this person getting a PDF attachment with the travel agency with an alleged travel detail? Right? So now the idea is you can have these kinds of rules in a system, right? If an email from some travel agency with an attachment goes to a person in a given group that is not supposed to get it, and a process running with that person's process ID where vulnerabilities have been discovered in the corresponding software, and that process now makes a connection to a DHCP address of the ISP in that area. Well, each of these things could individually happen, but taken together, they probably indicate that someone is trying to do something bad. Now, this is the kind of thing, this is the kind of reasoning that AI systems can do. And this, for those of you who are familiar with the area, this is classic deductive reasoning. But you don't have to be limited to deductive reasoning, right? You can do inductive reasoning. Who's supposed to come up with these rules? Well, you could have a machine learning system trained to say, given lots of examples of previous attacks, I will come up with rules like this, right? Or you could do abductive reasoning, which many human beings do, right? So in deductive reasoning, unless all the antecedents are true, the consequent is not true, right? But often human beings will do things like this. So I have a rule that says if Chrome version 65 or whatever it is, right, is running and these things happen, more memory is consumed than normal, and Chrome begins to touch the master boot record, then something bad is happening. Let's say I have a rule like this. Normally, in deductive reasoning, you could say, oh, well, Chrome is not running, so it doesn't matter the rest of the consequences. But a human being would reason abductively and say, well, Chrome is not running, but Firefox is running, right? And all the other consequent antecedents are true, and Firefox, like Chrome, is a browser. Therefore, it is possible that the consequent is true. It's possible that there is an attack. So this is the kind of abductive reasoning that human analysts do all the time, which we can also get an AI system to do. So I hope this sort of very high-level description made sense to you. Let me talk about how you build such a system, and then I'll spend about 5 or 7 minutes talking about some specific work we're doing real quick. So we built a demo of such a system. So you can see that there is a variety of sources, Reddit, Styx feeds from Talos and others, you know, the system that Google maintains. I'm blanking out on the name right now. I apologize. That, you know, given a malware will tell you what it's, well, given a binary will tell you whether it's a malware or not, and CVE feed. So it takes all this sort of threat sources that are textual in nature, but also takes a bunch of deployed sensors, right? And then does this kind of analytics that I was describing to you, right? So here's a specific example. So you can say that, hey, someone posted saying there is a new ransomware called WannaCry that uses malformed SMB to get access to a victim, right? So the malformed SMB is the eternal blue vulnerability. Then an analyst can have some background knowledge, right? So analysts can say, you know, malware will typically try to upload or download keys from some external servers that, you know, a machine will typically not connect to. And then second, it will immediately, the first thing it will do is it will begin to encrypt your file, right? And then that has observable things that you will see in a minute, right? So from my sense data, I can see, hey, I noticed that, you know, there are some malformed SMB packets that's not alerted me about. And I noticed that, you know, at the network, I suddenly see downloads from a server that my machine had never connected to before. And I notice, you know, that certain files are beginning to be modified that are typically not touched by a process. So I can now say, well, based on what I know, based on my prior experience, and based on the sense data, this probably looks like an attack. Let me stop it. And then you could mitigate it and do things. And so we actually built a scenario, and I'm not going to get into details on how we kind of thing. So we were monitoring file systems, we were monitoring processes, we were monitoring network traffics, and we had this ontology capturing all of this, as well as the background details, you know, about what we had read. So we demonstrated that you could do something like that. So one part of it that I want to spend a few minutes talking about, which is a good chunk of our research, is developing systems that can read textual descriptions about cybersecurity and extract information from them to express in that knowledge graph using our ontology, right? So for that, you have to find entities and their properties. Oh, this is talking about Microsoft. That's talking about Kaspersky, right? That's talking about a Unix system. Those are entities. And then you have relationships, right? You can say Microsoft owns Microsoft Word, right? Microsoft Word has vulnerability, remote code execution, etc., right? And events, right? So attack happened, attack used these kinds of tools and technologies. So we have to represent these, we have to link these to external knowledge bases, right? So for example, in some contexts, you may care, you know, and again, don't want to get into the geopolitics, but depending on which country you are in and who your potential adversaries are, you may care about, you know, who contributed the most to an open source software, right? There have been recent attacks on open source systems with you know, bad things being injected into them. Or you might care about, you know, who owns Nokia, or who owns you know, Microsoft. What country does that belong to? So you want to be able to sort of link these to external background knowledge and then reason over all of this. So, you know, this is the kind of thing you want to read, which is a description of the eternal blue vulnerability, which was exploited by WannaCry and many others. And you want to build this kind of knowledge base. So here is an example of what that looks like, right? And this is an animated slide that I don't want to. So you can say there's a company called Adobe that has a particular product, whether it's Muse or Photoshop or Flash Player. You can say that a particular Flash software is used by some other software, right? So Apple owns Safari. Safari uses Adobe Flash Player. You can say that certain actions mitigate certain vulnerabilities. So you see these kinds of entities and relationship that you want to build, and what you want to do is to read something like this and say, okay, I understand that this attack uses certain means to get in and then does a certain exploit, and you want to be able to represent this in the knowledge graph. So again, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over how we actually do it, but I do want to say that just in case you say, oh, yeah, there's a bunch of people that do NLP research, why can't you just download the Stanford NLP system and run it? Well, this is what happens. It just does not catch these kinds of things because it's trained to use Newswire and trained about political events and things like that. So you need to do some novel research so that you can actually capture the things of relevance in a cybersecurity thing. So we built an NER system that can correctly pick these kinds of targets, and then with pretty good results. And then we want to be able to capture the relationships between them. What is the mitigation of a vulnerability? Whether an attacker was known to have launched another attack, what attacker is this attack attributed to? What is an attack pattern and what kind of vulnerabilities does it target? And then we do that using sort of deep networks and word embeddings and things of that nature. Again, I think we do a pretty good job. So skipping over the technical details, what you want to do is to read this kind of stuff. Again, notice this is an actual, this is an after action report that we got from one of our DoD collaborators. Again, none of this is classified. This is all in the open. None of the research we do. And this is what, a knowledge graph that we extracted represented in our ontology looks like. And this is talking about this particular malware called XWeber. Now, the thing is, you're probably going to have lots of different textual pieces of evidence talking about the same malware, right? So here's another one that also talks about the Helsing malware, that talks about the hashes of some of its, some of the hashes associated with that malware, as well as what kind of domains were used for the command and control system, as well as what files it tries to affect, right? So this is giving you more knowledge. So when you extract from this, you get a different knowledge graph. And since they're talking about the same, you have to, and again, you have to do this automatically. You basically have to say, wow, oh, these are all talking about the same thing. So let me fuse the two together to get all the information about this particular malware into a single knowledge graph. And once you have something like this, you can do very interesting things, right? So here's a project that was done by an undergraduate who's now graduated as a grad student at NC State, Lorenzo Neal. And the idea was, he said, okay, now that I have tools like this, can I basically automatically figure out vulnerabilities in the development pipeline? So what I'm going to do is, you tell me what software you are running. For open source software, I will see what libraries it links to, and then I will go to the GitHub repos of those libraries, parse through all the textual description about vulnerabilities on this, fuse them, and then tell you, okay, your system may have these kinds of vulnerabilities because you are using these open source tools, which in turn call these libraries that have those vulnerabilities. You can also do multilingual stuff. A lot of the threat intelligence, again, this is from a very American perspective. A lot of threat intelligence in the dark web is actually not in English, right? So how do you make stuff work? Again, this was a work done by a student who was an undergraduate then. She's now a PhD student. in our group. So I'm almost done. So let me just give you the flip side of the event, right? So you do all this AI and you build all these fancy systems and they help you detect attacks. Great. Well, now the adversary is going to begin to attack your AI system, right? And this is not specific to cybersecurity. This is broadly, as you are beginning to deploy AI systems to do things, people will attack you. Look, misinformation is all the rage these days, but it's existed with us since times immemorial. You know, when we were young, before there was social media, gossip used to spread word of mouth. Fake information used to spread word of mouth. It's just the scale has transformed with social media. But you know, even in social media, this has been around for a while. So this is a paper we had in 2013 in WWW. This was joint work done with some students at IIIT Delhi, in particular, Aditi Gupta and then Hemang Lamba, as well as their mentor, Professor Kumar Guru, who's since moved to IIIT Hyderabad. So, you know, when Hurricane Sandy happened in the United States, there were all these kinds of fake images, right? Sharks swimming on the highway, a McDonald's that was completely flooded. And those of you who are movie aficionados might recognize image B, which is about, which was claimed to be about this hurricane, but was actually a screen grab from a movie about climate change the day after. So basically the idea is, if you're going to deploy cybersecurity systems and you're going to read the dark web to discover threats, well, I'm going to start putting out fake threats on the dark web. I'm going to say, hey, there's a vulnerability in this software, even though there is none. So you have to build defenses against those kinds of things, which we've done. It is a very good example from some research at Rutgers in Michigan a couple of years ago, where all these self-driving systems that are being built that recognize signs. So they showed that simply by putting post-it notes at the right places, right, you could get those kinds of softwares to take this stop sign and recognize it instead as a 45-mile-per-hour speed zone sign. This is a huge difference, and all you've done is stuck a post-it note. And the example you see in the middle, this love, stop, hate, this is a common kind of defacing of these signs that young kids will do, right? Imagine your software system getting fooled by these adversarial examples. So here's another one, right? This is work done by my colleague Hamid Pirshawash. So and this is the standard image recognition algorithm. I won't tell you from which company. Pretty well-known used algorithm. You show it a picture of a car and it recognizes it as a car. You show it a picture of this same car, and in the corner you put some cleverly generated but random looking noise. And now this noise is recognized as a chair with probability 1, and correspondingly the car is now recognized as a dining table. It tells you how brittle some of these AI systems are. So mostly I talked about how AI can be used for cybersecurity, but I'm just ending by telling you that as you deploy AI, adversaries will actually exploit the AI and attack it too. So that's another big field of research, where work is being done. So let me stop here and see if there are any questions that I can help answer. So Dr. Vedula, back to you.
Yeah, sure. I'm back, and let's have some questions, folks. There were 150 people here. I'm sure many of you have some background in cybersecurity and may have some comments and questions. Come on in, folks. Okay, let's see. One question coming in from Vishruti Desai. How can we prepare data set from source code for some specific patterns?
I'm not sure I fully follow.
If you want to elaborate, Vishruti, you want to elaborate what you're talking about, what your question is? And more expansion of what you're saying? Okay, let's wait for some more thoughtful people to come up with questions. Come on in, folks. We're here. I guess a very general question is, how can we protect ourselves, I guess?
So think
Norton,
about it.
is Norton the way to go?
So think about it this way, right? I mean, it's actually an interesting question, and later today I'm going to be testifying to the Maryland State Senate because there is a bill that has been introduced. So in the United States, right, and it's true in different forms the world over, but let me give you the US example because that's the thing I'm testifying about. So children, from a young age, when they go to elementary school, they are taught, so for normal health, they are taught sort of hygiene, right? So whenever you come out from the bathroom, you must wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds and then dry them. So children, you're teaching them that, right? Young children are told stranger danger, right? If you see a strange person and they try to talk to you, you should shout and attract the attention of others. Or in the Indian context, which is the other one that I'm familiar with, some years ago, there was this whole Swachh Bharat campaign, and children were taught in schools, and I have seen this happen, right? A school bus was going, and a person threw something, they ate a banana and threw the banana shell on the street, and some kid from the bus shouted, "Uncle, Swachh Bharat," right? So you teach children, young children, about these things and how to be safe in this world, in the physical world. So the claim is that you need to start teaching these kinds of things at a young age because all of these children are now in the cyber world, right? I mean, in the United States, elementary school kids have smartphones on which they can do stuff, right? Let me give you a very simple example from a few years ago and just see how much worse it would be today with social media. So this is back before social media when web pages were emerging. So there was this kid in one of the prestigious universities in the United States. He was the topper of the chemical engineering batch in his year. And he made a web page where he said, "I am a chemical engineer. I like to make things go boom." Right? And there's a picture of some chemical experiment which led to an explosion. And then he noticed that he was not getting any job offers when senior year. So he asked one of the recruiters, "I'm the topper of the batch, what's going on?" He says, the HR people Google you, and the first thing that comes up is a web page where it says you like to make things go boom. No company is going to risk, right? So this is the kind of things that we have to start teaching. You have to start teaching children at a young age. Don't click on links on emails. Don't believe all the pictures you see on social media, right? Don't this kind of stuff has to be taught at a young age. That's besides being careful, right? That there's really no other defense because the adversary will find a way to get it.
Okay, a couple of other questions have come in. This is from Professor Deb from IIT Kharagpur. What is your opinion about security in decision making?
So, Professor Deb, I'm not sure where you were going with that question, but let me take an interpretation and feel free to reach out to me on this, right? If I'm not answering your question correctly. But so any decision-making process has to be informed or should be informed by security-related considerations. What we often see happen is that a decision is made to do something, and then the security-related elements are afterthoughts. Since you're asking this question from IIT, I'll give you an example from India. Some years ago, I was giving a talk like this, and the audience consisted of people from the Indian Armed Forces. And one person came up to me at the end and said, "Sir, we have designed this brand new ERP system for purchase in whatever, some organization X in the armed forces. And can you come and give a talk about how we should be securing now?" So I said, "I'm happy to give a talk, but if you already designed and deployed the system, you made the decision, and now you are retrofitting in sort of security, is probably not going to be a good thing. So security has to be a first order principle in decision making. And again, if I didn't quite answer the question you were intending, reach out to me on email.
Another question here is Professor Rajesh Solanki, is Pegasus AI based, since it doesn't require clicking on any link?
Sir, Pegasus, I don't know if they use AI or not. The reason it's not requiring clicking on any link, there is a very detailed explanation. If you send me an email, I'm happy to send it to you. Not something I came up with, but the forensics people.
Okay.
It's actually very, very interesting, right? So what they did was they used an old algorithm that was still in systems in JPEG viewers from the days of fax machines. Remember those? Right, so it would compress the fax to send over essentially a run length kind of encoding on character counts, and then there was code so that when you receive this compressed fax, it would expand it back and print it out. Well, the Pegasus people found a very, very clever way to use that to essentially become a Turing complete system. So they ran arbitrary instructions using those things that were built into a JPEG viewer, which is why as soon as the image popped up on your screen, you don't have to click a link, it was executing that code.
Okay. Question from, I believe, probably a student. What advice would you like to give to beginners who are just getting into this field?
Study hard. Look, this is going to be a growing field, and what we need two different kinds of people. Both are equally important. You need the practitioners who will do the craft, but you also need the researchers who will think about some of the longer term issues, and you need sort of a good interface between the two, because research happening in isolation from practice, right, is not likely to be very fruitful or useful, and practice that doesn't think about new things is unlikely to be successful, because your adversaries are, especially at nation state levels, right? So I would say to sort of study and try to understand as much as you can about the field.
Okay, this one is I think a question that many people might have, from Abdifita. He's asking, how do I know that a certain email is malware? How do you recognize an email?
That's a wonderful question. You don't, right? Which is why you have to be hyper cautious, and this is where long-term AI may help. Short-term, we have to use the NI that is in our brains, right? So, let me give you an example, and I'll try not to name the countries or the organizations involved. So, in a major sort of defense-related research organization in a country, I was talking to someone, and they said, and I had given a talk just like this, right, talking about malware, and all this was some years ago, so the examples were different. And this person was in a fairly senior position, and they said, this really stuck home with me, because just a few days ago, I got an email from my boss that was actually talking about, some real issue in our organization, and I had forwarded an email with an attachment. And she said, I would have clicked it, except I had just come out of a meeting with that person, with my boss. And I said, if this was so important and I'm just in a meeting with my boss would have told me something about it. So you have to use your sort of natural intelligence, and I hate to say it, but you have to be suspicious of everything. There is an old saying in Sanskrit that will not make any sense to most of you, but it says, "Na vishvased vishvaste avishvaste chapi na vishvased," which is like, don't believe in everything effectively, right? So just
on that note, I think we'll ask Hans to come in. By the way, I loved your cricket analogy. India is playing South Africa right now, one-day match.
Yes, but I'm not doing very well from what I hear.
Oh, they're not doing okay. Only 2 wickets have fallen.
No, but they lost the test series.
The test match, ODI started. Anyway, Hans, over to you.
Thank you very, very much, Krishna. Anupam, it's been quite inspiring, and I will very carefully continue to listen to this recording and learn and discuss it with some other friends and colleagues of mine who are deeply engaged in this fascinating, important strategic field. So I really appreciate it. I just want to take this minute here, Krishna, and just thank all of the participants. It's a terrific size group today that joined us here, and to welcome you to our first webinar and look at the quality of the webinar. Thank you to Anupam for this year, 2022. And as you know, we will continue in working in partnership, IFES, GDC, and IUCE for this year on a pretty much weekly basis to engage thoughtful, critical thinkers in individuals such as Anupam at a global scale. We also have a webinar series in Latin America in Spanish and in Portuguese. So I'm very happy at the wonderful attendance today. The other thing, just in terms of the IFES GDC community that I have the responsibility for, is I want you to know we are very pleased. I know we have a substantial participation of friends and colleagues from India, that both our India and Africa book series of Rising to the Top, written by global engineering women leaders, we just published, by the way, and we are in the process now to begin publishing this year 2 more editions focusing on the MENA world and Southeast Asia. So let me know if you have any questions on that. And just a final comment here, we have several leaders of GDC, IFES, and of course a lot of friends in different parts. We're already beginning the planning process for our global conference, and I hope many of us can be there in person in Cape Town, South Africa in November. And certainly a topic such as cybersecurity, Anupam, and I'll follow up with you, particularly since you and I are connected to the same university here, and we are almost neighbors, which is just beautiful. I'd like to find a way to engage you and some other colleagues to contribute on this very important, critical topic of cybersecurity this year. But I'll follow up with details. Again, many thanks, Krishna. Wonderful to see you of the year. All the best. We have an exciting series coming up, and again, peace be with all of you, and above all, be healthy. Please take care of your health, all of you, in these challenging times. Thank you kindly.
Okay, thank you, Hans. Thank you, Anupam, and everybody be happy, be safe and healthy. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.